Live. My name's Ricky Arundel, and tonight we're going to be talking about opening your speech, getting a good opening to get the audience on board. So, opening your speech, it's to me the most important part of the speech. I know, and I said in the things below that the the conclusion is important. It's the last thing people hear. It's the thing they're often going to take away and remember. But the problem is that you've got to get them to the end. You've got to get the audience with you along to the end. And the opening is what grabs them, pulls them in. The purpose of the opening, as far as I'm concerned, is to draw everybody in, to draw the audience into the speech, to sell them on taking the Now, here's a problem with the introduction. Very often, speakers leave the introduction to the chair or the host or whoever's going to introduce you, and you really should not do that. Because if you leave the introduction to somebody else, if you don't give them the information, they're going to have to find it. And they'll probably go to your website, or they'll look at some of the blurb that you've sent them and the bio and various other things. And the problem is that your biography, the stuff that goes in the program or anything that they know about you, is often much, much longer than you would want. And to be honest, you don't want too much in the introduction. Certainly I don't, because when I deliver a speech, I'm going to introduce into that speech quite a bit of information about me, about my story, about where I'm going. So the last thing I want is for someone to give away all my punchlines about things. Those are my stories. Those are the big highlights sometimes of what I want to tell. So I want to keep that introduction fairly straightforward. Now I'm going to focus on the introduction as a completely separate show, and I'll do that. It probably be tomorrow, but we'll later in the week I'm going to talk about the introduction, and we'll look at some examples of how you can put an introduction. But bear in mind that your opening is only going to work if you get the right introduction. If somebody gives you the wrong introduction, if somebody gives you a long introduction, or worst thing that happened to me, this was it. It's one of the reasons I don't do after dinner speaking, because you really have no control over after dinner speaking. You're speaking to an audience largely who've had way too much to drink, so they're not interested in content, and I'm a bit of a content speaker. But I think I'm trying to make sure that it is quite humorous, but I've been introduced by somebody who really was full of jokes, and it was an unbelievable, run of a comedy routine, stand-up comedy routine from the chair. And if you follow something like that, you really have got to work hard to get yourself up, because now what they've done is they set an expectation that this is going to be a very funny talk. And if yours isn't a very funny talk, the last thing you want is someone to set it up for you to have to follow, because from that moment onwards, because you don't get a laugh, you're going to really drop. You're going to be perceived as wrong. And if you've got a drunk audience that thinks you aren't very good, you're in trouble. So introductions are really important. Now, the second thing about opening your speech is not about speaking at all. I see so many people rush up onto the stage, and they've almost started talking before they get onto the stage. Audience. One of the things that speakers have to learn to become friends with is silence. I like to get up on stage and I'm going to stand there sometimes 15, 30 seconds. That's a long time, long time. But if the audience, particularly if the audience is a bit sort of noisy and restless, I'll stand there and wait till they've settled, connect with the audience a bit. It depends a little bit on what the talk is and how I'm going to do it. But if I want a nice dramatic opening, definitely silence is the most dramatic thing you can do. Stand there, just be silent, watch the audience. Think about it. I'm going to look at various different things that you can do. You've got to get attention. That's really what we're talking about. Grab the attention so that the audience is focused. Ooh, what's this? What's it all about? A little bit of anticipation. Oh, we're going on a journey. We are competing, not with other speakers who are talking about content. Our competition, whenever we get well, and especially when we're doing it on Zoom, when we're doing presentations here, we are constantly in competition with the TV in the next room. Oh God, no, I think I'll go and watch Corrie. Yeah, why would you watch me if you've got a great movie to watch? Unless I can make the content interesting, unless I can make this something worth doing, you're not going to bother. And that's going to happen in those opening minutes, because I know very well, and I look at the stats. Yeah, I do start a video program, and I know that in a couple of minutes, people are gone. They don't hang around. They don't look at it for long unless they think, oh, this could be interesting. I'll have a listen to this. So you've got to give people a sense that this is going to be a journey. This is going to be worthwhile sitting back and having a look. It's only going to be, 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever, but sit in. Let's have a go. So let's have a look at some of the things that you can do to open things up really, really well. And it can be a responsive question. How many people here have ever, and put your hand up, if you want people to respond to a question, by the way, and I'm talking about in an audience, you can do it on Zoom. It's not quite so, what I find in Zoom and on online, if I ask people to put their hands up, it'll be a slow response, much, much slower. Whereas if I say, a hands up if you have, and put my hand up, then I can pretty much guarantee the audience will respond very, very quickly. I've got the answer in a few seconds. On Zoom, it's going to take me maybe 30 seconds before I've actually got the response I want. And I'm looking around at 50 different little video screens to see who's put their hand up. It does work. You can use it. I think it's not so effective online, but it's certainly a very effective tool. Just think, it's got to be relevant to what you're talking about. It's got to introduce people into the topic. How many people some bad parts to his life. He was almost burnt alive at one point and was put back together. Then he had a plane crash and broke his back. And he is one of the greatest speakers in the world. And he rolls up onto the stage in his wheelchair. His name is W. Mitchell. If you ever get a chance to listen to him, he is amazing. And he just turns to the audience in his big, booming voice and says, have you ever been to prison? I have. Every single day of my life. And the audience is with him. We know what he's talking about. The prison is the wheelchair that he sits in every day of his life because he can no longer move. And then he goes on to say, but it's not what happens to you that matters. It's what you do about it. And that's it. That brief little opening draws you in and everybody knows, well, yeah, I've got to listen to this story. And that's when you start to hear his story. So I've got a talk called about extraordinary moments. And it just starts. Let me talk about extraordinary moments. The 14th of July, 1995. That was one of my biggest extraordinary moments. Now already, you wouldn't know what happened on 1990. What happened at that time? That's not a question. That was just a statement. You can start with dramatic statistics. Now, statistics, just 20%, 30%, those sorts of things don't really work. I had to do something. It wasn't actually in the opening. It was a little bit later on. I needed to break people from some really, really bad statistics. I'd gone through a whole bunch of statistics in a speech, and I needed to break them out and bring some humor in. So I ladies and gentlemen, statistically speaking, that is how many of you are not going to make it to age 65. Now, do you see? I could have used that as an opening. If I'd wanted to. I had some other opening for that particular talk. I've used that sort of thing before. Do you see what I mean about statistics? It's not about saying, oh, 1/3 of everybody dies before 65. I was saying in an audience, just stand up, illustrate the statistics in such a way that people go, oh my God, that's a lot of people. So you can play with different statistics. So what about a quote from an article? Now, particularly if I'm reading on something, I mean, quotes, and I've used all sorts of different things. I was, again, that same talk, I was doing something about. I was doing some talk about how many people died and how common it was, and whether people are disabled. Well, as I left to get my taxi to go to the conference centre, I came outside and there's an ambulance there, and the window cleaner had fallen from his ladder, broken his leg, and was being taken to hospital. I thought, I can't not use that. There we go. And on a day as I'm walking to do a conference, somebody has actually become part of the statistics that I'm using. Now, that's not a quote from an article. That was a quote from a personal experience. But I started that particular talk off looking at a paper. Have you seen the papers today? No good, no, and there actually was no bad news. So it was just a little quote, or a few humorous things in the paper that I could quote. And then I referred to the kind of quotes that you get from articles. We've just seen it in the last couple of days. It was only 63 people, but a plane drops from the sky. If I want to do something to grab attention about, world's, changing events, boom, aeroplane. There's awful statistics around about the statistic, and I heard the quote I heard in the paper the other day, which really quite shocked me, and I have used it in a discussion, was in London, we're reaching a point where 50% of all the people in hospital have COVID. That's a shocking statistic. And so we're using some attention grabbing statistics, but it's also a quote from an article. And there are all sorts of ways. I have a look through different articles that I've seen, see if I can grab one that's good. Now, my favorite is stories. And usually it's stories from myself. And I will tell, the story I said, 14th of July, 1995, I boarded a plane bound for Minneapolis, Minnesota, to attend a conference. I came back completely transformed. A conference was the most. So already in sort of telling a little bit of story about, and now it's just the story of traveling there. And I, will add to that the story of meeting W. Mitchell and various other people that I met, and the inspirational speeches I heard, and how I came back, and as a consequence of that, set up the Professional Speaking Association in the UK. So there's a whole big story there about one extraordinary moment when I just took a flight to Minneapolis, and that was the day when everything changed. Wasn't a big drama thing, but then I've got another drama about crashing a taxi that also changed my life, took me off in a new direction. So I've got lots of stories that I've built out, lots of, and I've been talking. Do you remember I talked to you about doing that timeline of all the different things that have veered you off in different directions? Every single one of those moments through your life where you went veering off in another direction, that is a story, and that's a story you most people in. I'm noticing a little bit of problem with video tonight. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm hoping that you're following with it. Dramatic claims, there's all sorts of things. Again, I've already illustrated some of the stuff around COVID. All manner of different dramatic claims. And you've got to think about, again, your speech, your talk. What is it you're going to be talking about? What kind of drama can you put into that? I do a lot of talks about transgender awareness, and there is an enormous amount of drama about the challenges that are faced there. If I'm talking, let's say, for example, to a housing association, I can actually bring up a quote: 33% of all transgender people at some point in their life are homeless. It's a big thing. It's a big challenge because they often find staying with friends, trying to get their lives back together. It happens to a lot of trans people. Big claims, big moments. It draws people in. It grabs their attention. Oh my God. And they want to hear a little bit more. Now, another possibility here is a prop. Excuse me 1 second while I just grab the prop I meant to grab for me. There we are, back again. Sorry about that. Here we go. It's a bottle of beer. Simple bottle of beer from the Wold Brewery. Now, that's a prop I use, I've used quite often. And the reason I use that, because I helped someone with a speech, and they were speaking at a food fair, and they were promoted on behalf of their client, the Wold Brewery. And so I sat down with them and helped them. I was coaching them to do the speech, and I helped them to look at these bottles of beer. And there was actually a pack of 4 of them. And full good story about each of the bottles of beer, so that she could deliver those. And it was so successful. It connected people with each of those bottles of beer. But there was the prop was being used. There was a physical thing. There was a story connected around it, and the story about how foot and mouth disease had helped had really been the inspiration for the Wold Brewery becoming a brewery instead of a farm. So all of those are very appropriate ways. And yet you can walk on the stage with outrageous props. There's a great speaker in the States, Tim Gard, and he's very, very funny, incredibly funny. And he comes on stage with suitcases full of props and uses these props. Even the first arrival on stage, it's going to be funny, was he's got chicken legs sticking out of the top of his suitcase. You think, oh, what the hell's this? Big notice on the front of his suitcase that says, I know you think this is your suitcase, but it's not. This one is mine. You're trying to grab his suitcase, and he tells stories of that. But the point is that it's all humor around traveling, because that's what he does an awful lot. But can you see how you've got the audience already engaged? They're thinking, oh my God, this is going to be good. Now, humor is another thing. Let me just talk about humor, because this is the big danger, I think. I've told humorous anecdotes and started with humorous stories, but I'm really cautious and careful with this whole thing, because it can go so badly wrong. A lot of people think, oh, get up and tell some jokes. The problem is this: if you may get it right, you may practice it and get it perfectly. You got 2 or 3 great jokes, everybody's laughing, but does the rest of your speech keep at that level? Most people don't. Tell a few jokes, and then we drop into a dull and boring speech, because it hasn't got the rest of the speech isn't about humor. It wasn't intended to be humorous. So if you put that this is going to be a very funny talk, and then it isn't. So you've set an expectation, failed to deliver it, failed speech. Never set up an expectation you cannot meet. So use humor, absolutely, definitely. People like some humor. Use self-deprecating humor about yourself, absolutely right. But be very careful at the beginning that you don't make it so funny that there is an expectation that the rest of your speech is going to be funny, unless the rest of your speech is very funny. And if that's the case, fine, go away. Brilliant. Do some great big speech humor. Final thing I want to talk about is it's about credibility. This is what Aristotle called the ethos part of the ethos, logos, pathos. Ethos is the credibility, that what gives you the right to be listened to. And that comes from sharing some personal information. A lot of people bump into this. Hi, my name's Ricky Arundel. I've got a master's degree and a whole big spiel about what I've done. That's the wrong opening. If you're going to use that information, use it and inject it through the talk to help illustrate things, to help give credibility to certain points and factors that are going along. But don't open with a whole big thing about who you are and where you are. Now, put a little bit of that into the introduction. Let the chair give the credibility in the introduction. Doesn't need to be much, just a little bit that says, this is why we're listening to this person today. They they have done this, and my introduction does that, and we'll talk about introductions in more detail tomorrow. But think about that. Just basically little tiny bits. Just inject stuff through the talk, but be careful not stories that actually help to sell where you're going on your talk. But don't make it the big focus. Don't do the whole big, this is who I am, I'm wonderful. It won't actually help you at all. So join me tomorrow when we're going to be looking at introductions, making sure that the person who introduces you helps you with your talk, and start to think around what could you do to open up your speech and make it draw the audience in. If you need a bit of help to get your own speech together, get a good opening, get the whole thing together, just email me, ricky@rickyarundel.com. I will be more than happy to set up a free 30-minute introductory session where I can help and start to show you the way of making a great speech, TED Talk or whatever, keynote speech, or just a staff meeting speech. Ricky@rickyarundel.com is where you'll find me. Just write to me there tonight, and it's given me a few thoughts and ideas for your own speeches, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.